Hello and welcome to the start of a brand new review series where I'm going to be reviewing all of the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games, starting with the very first one. The reason I'm doing this now, of course, is because I want to celebrate the upcoming release of the remake of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, which I'll also be reviewing when it comes out. And by no means have I pre-ordered the £90 collector's edition that comes with an actual skateboard deck, because what kind of psychopath would do that, right? Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was released in 1999 and was specifically taking a look at the PS1 version, which I'm pretty sure is the version that most people played. It's definitely the one that I played, I know that much. I'm sure that I don't really need to explain how the game works, but with this being the first video in the review series, I feel like I'm bound by law to explain it. Basically, it's a sports game, where the idea is to pull off tricks and combo them together to get high scores. The square, triangle and circle buttons all represent a specific type of trick, and when pressed with a direction on the D-pad, it will result in a different trick depending on the direction pressed. Square is used for flip tricks, circle for grab tricks, and triangle for grinds. By using a combination of these tricks in certain situations, you'll be able to chain combos together. For example, you can go up a vert ramp, flip trick, then grab, then land it for a small combo. Or you can jump into a flip trick, then grind on a rail, then flip trick out of it. As you can imagine, mastering the controls here can result in pulling off some awesome feeling combos, and that's where this game becomes so addictive. It never really gets boring trying to beat the high scores on each level or playing in multiplayer and directly competing with a friend. There's also some slightly more advanced stuff, like pulling off a fast plant by double tapping up before doing a jump, which not only counts as a trick to improve your score multiplier, but it also gives you more height and distance too. Then there's some special tricks which vary depending on the character you're using. These can rack up points quickly, but the button combinations for these tricks are much more complicated than a standard trick, making them a bit harder to use. Their animations normally last a lot longer than a standard trick too, and you can't use them without first filling a special meter by pulling off standard combos without bailing. So basically you're really required to know what you're doing before attempting these. What's weird is that there's no way of checking the special trick button combinations in the game itself, and even the manual only lists one special trick per character, when they actually have 2 or 3 in total. That seems like quite a big oversight to be honest, but maybe they just wanted you to experiment with random combinations? That seems very counterintuitive though. Something weird about this game is that in a lot of PAL regions, it was actually called Tony Hawk's Skateboarding and not Pro Skater, despite all of the sequels from the second game onwards using the Pro Skater name. I wonder what made them change the name. It's like they thought us wacky Europeans would think that the name Pro Skater meant pro roller skating, so they needed to spell it out for us. So we've covered the basics of how the game works, so let's now dive into how the game is actually structured. You start the game and there's 4 modes, a career mode, 2-player mode, single session and free skate. Single session is just a high score mode, and free skate is where you can skate around and practice without any time limit. These are both self-explanatory really, but the other 2 modes have a little bit more depth. The career mode is the main mode of the game. Before starting this, you select a character who all have their own stats based around ollie height, speed, air, which is how high you go when you jump off vert ramps, and grind rail balance. You then customize a deck by choosing a design, change the trucks which affects your turning stat, and you can swap out the colour of your wheels too. At first you won't have that many decks to choose from, but we'll get into how you unlock more a little bit later. After that you can select a level. Of course when you first start playing the game there'll only be one to choose, which is Warehouse. So you start that and the game begins. You're given a list of 5 objectives to clear in each level, and by finishing each one you're rewarded with a tape. By getting a certain number of these tapes, you'll unlock more levels, more decks, which improve your character's stats, and by getting all of them in the game as a single character, you'll also unlock a new character in the form of Officer Dick. I'm not sure why a random police officer is the secret character, but it's better than nothing I suppose. The objectives in each level are to collect the S, K, A, T and E letters hidden around, beat 2 tiers of high scores, find a super secret hidden tape, and find 5 of a certain object hidden around the level too. This last objective is the most interesting because it actually changes depending on the level. So in Warehouse it's 5 piles of crates, in School it's grinding on 5 tables, in Downtown it's smashing no skating signs, and the list goes on. I do kinda wish there was a bit more variety with the objectives here to make the levels properly stand out. It would have been awesome to have stuff that was exclusive to each level, rather than it being predictable by repeating the same stuff. Luckily, the game does inject some variety in the way that, as well as playing the normal open levels, you also have these downhill levels where you start at the top and make your way to an end point at the very bottom. And then there's also some competition levels to break the game up as well. The downhill levels are similar to the normal levels in the way that they have the same objectives, but with them being designed in this way where it's basically one long path, you have to approach the objectives in a slightly different way. Maybe focusing on 1 or 2 objectives at a time, rather than trying to do everything in one go. The competition levels are actually very different though, not being objective based and instead having you pull off tricks and combos and be given a rating depending on how well you did. Bailing will give you a lower score here too, so this is where your skating ability is really tested. By winning these competitions, you're rewarded with either a bronze, silver or gold medal depending on how well you did, and by getting all of the gold medals, you'll unlock a live action video of your chosen skater skating in real life. Something I've neglected to mention in the review so far is that there is quite a fair bit of live action footage used in the game. The game's opening is a montage of all of the skaters in the game, there's the unlockable videos, and there's also some bonus videos found in the main menu too. I think this aspect of the game is actually really cool. It somehow makes the game feel authentic to skate culture and introduces you to the concept of pro skating and who the characters in the game actually are in reality for people that weren't into skating. You can tell they had a lot of fun with these videos too. There's even a bail video which is unlocked for finishing the game for the first time, and even a developer bail reel which is unlocked for 100% clearing the game as Officer Dick. Another huge element of the game that makes it feel authentic to skate culture is the soundtrack, and while I can't play any of the tracks here because I don't want to get a copyright strike and then be buried by the YouTube algorithm, I will say that there's some absolute classics here. Standouts for me are Superman by Goldfinger, Jerry Was a Race Car Driver by Primus, and New Girl by the Suicide Machines. But really, it's all good stuff. The first game was lacking hip-hop tracks and was a lot more punky, but that would be rectified in the later games. I've got to be honest, I even think that the in-game advertising here works, because it's always showing brands that are once again associated with skate culture. So it ends up actually adding to the vibe of the game rather than being distracting. Not many games could be improved with in-game advertising, but this is a rare example where it does actually kinda make sense. Speaking of advertising, you know how earlier I mentioned that the only way of seeing what special tricks you can do is by looking at the manual? Well, while I was doing that, I noticed that there's an advert on the back of the manual for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. Wow, they were pretty confident with this game to have already been developing a sequel, huh? The reason that this advert is here is probably because my version of the game is the Platinum version, which would have been released after the initial version. So they probably updated the manual because Pro Skater 2 was already in development, but still. Imagine buying this game and then seeing an advert for the next one. You might as well have just waited for the sequel at that point. One of the reasons this game series is so beloved is due to the levels featured in the games. And while in the later entries they got a little bit more creative, the ones in the first game are nothing to scoff at. We have some absolute classics here, like Warehouse, School, Mall, and Downhill Jam. And there is also the secret last level, Roswell, which does have a bit of that wackiness that is mostly seen in some of the later games. This level is set in Area 51, and you can find not only a UFO, but also an actual alien too, which makes this level stand out, and it's an awesome reward for getting most of the tapes in the game. I actually went into this game remembering not liking the downhill levels, but after playing it again, my mind has actually been changed about this. I found myself enjoying these levels, and I didn't find them anywhere near as annoying as I thought I would. The issue is that when you reach the end of the level, the run is finished and you can't keep playing and you don't get to reset to the top of the hill again. But this really doesn't matter, you can easily just turn around if you miss something and have another attempt at getting it. It's not like you're locked into moving forward at all times or something. So yeah, I actually thought that these levels were good, particularly Mall, which is one of the most interestingly themed levels in the whole game. All of the levels are filled with rails, ramps and general stuff to do tricks on, and no area is lacking attention to detail. There's actually some really funny stuff hidden around, like the previously mentioned alien in Roswell. Or how about these police cars in streets, which are placed outside of donut shops and at crime scenes where a chalk outline of a murder victim is placed. It's really cool, and generally the graphics are pretty decent. There is a fog effect to hide the bad draw distance, but because you're kind of always focused on your skater and the immediate surroundings, this isn't too bad. Plus, most levels do a good job of hiding this by having bends in the paths or being fairly small areas to begin with. Obviously, with it being an attempt at photorealistic graphics on the PS1, it has aged. It's not like you would play this and then see the skaters in real life and recognise them from their in-game model or anything, but all of the characters look at least somewhat like the actual people, and the animation in the game is actually really impressive for the time. The game does a great job with selling the levels as real places too. There's always stuff going on, even outside of the level bounds, that make it feel natural, rather than like you're skating around on a platform in a void of space. You know what else this game has? Multiplayer. And this mode isn't to be overlooked. I would assume that some people literally only played this mode of the game, and it definitely became one of the premier multiplayer games on the PS1. The 2-player mode in the game consists of 3 modes. You might think that's a bit lacking in content, but luckily these 3 modes are probably the best ones in the entire Tony Hawk series, so it's actually not too bad. Firstly, we have Trick Attack, which is the most obvious mode you would expect to see. This is where you have 2 minutes on the clock and you skate around and compete to get the highest score. The other 2 modes are perhaps a little bit more interesting, these being Graffiti and Horse. In Graffiti, the objective isn't to get the highest score, but instead to do tricks on as many objects as possible. Doing a trick on a rail, ramp, or anything else will paint it your colour, and you can either play this by just painting as much as possible in the time limit, or you can steal your opponent's painted objects by doing a better trick on them. This adds a tactical element because you have to balance out if it's worth going for a steal, or if you'd be better off going to a new area and painting new objects. It's a great game mode and can get very frantic. Horse is a turn-based multiplayer mode where the first player takes a turn and does a trick or combo, then the second player has a go and has to beat that score with their own trick or combo. If a player bails or doesn't beat their opponent's score, they lose and receive a letter of a word. Traditionally, this word would be horse, hence the game mode being called Horse. The next player then has another turn and sets a new score in a new area of the level, and it repeats. As you can imagine, this can get pretty insane if 2 people who are good at the game are playing, because you'll just keep topping each other's scores, making it more and more tense as it goes on. A lot of the fun here is that you can actually write your own word that slowly gets spelled out to the person who loses too. Just try not to be too crude, okay? I think it's pretty obvious that I like this game. It's got an in-depth single-player mode with a lot to unlock, the multiplayer mode is awesome and can keep you busy for ages, but the game isn't perfect. It actually has quite a few issues, but a lot of it boils down to the fact that this was the first game in the series, and as such, it's quite unrefined. The absolute biggest thing that's disappointing about this game is that it lacks a lot of features from the later games that make such vital improvements to the gameplay that it feels weird going back to this game and not being able to do certain things. There's some stuff to do with extra modes or customization elements that are missing, like for example there's no Creator Skater or Creator Park modes. But the most important and game altering stuff is to do with the gameplay. You can't manual, there's no in-depth lip tricks, no reverts, spine transfers, grind manual or lip trick switching, wall slaps, you can't button mash to get up from a bale quicker, you can't flatten yourself out while in the air, and there's not even a grind balance meter, and you just have to balance by using your character's animation instead. So many elements are just straight up not in this first game, and while it's obviously not the game's fault because it was the first one, it makes it sort of difficult to recommend when the sequels improve on literally every single element. Don't let that completely put you off though, because it is still a good game and I seriously enjoyed my time with it. The core gameplay is so addicting even without the quality of life improvements, and I think that's the sign of a good game. Another issue with the game is something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I can't work out if the frame rate is bad, or if it's just that the animations have to completely finish before you can line another trick up with another button combination, or if it's just that the general movement and physics can be very janky at times. Maybe it's even a mixture of all of these things, but the end result is that the game doesn't feel all that smooth to play at times. There's certain things like how sometimes you'll bail if you try and execute tricks too quickly, or how it takes so long to pick up speed from a standstill, or how you turn so slowly on the spot, or how you need to be really precise when landing on a rail rather than snap into it a little bit more just to make it feel smoother. And it just ends up making the game feel a little bit off. It's like sometimes you'll want to do something and feel like you've pressed all of the right button combinations, but it just won't work the way you intended it to. And it's a little bit annoying at times. It feels like with this first game they were almost trying to make it more of a skating sim rather than an unrealistic arcade game which uses skateboarding as its basis. This is not only shown by the controls, but also by the levels being set in real world locations that you could actually find yourself skating in. The only real exceptions to this being Mall and Roswell. This also has another effect, which is that it makes the levels feel a little bit samey because there's no obvious different theming. That isn't to say they aren't varied from a design perspective, but from a purely visual one, I feel like maybe they could have stood apart a little bit more in some cases. The objectives being pretty much the same in all of the levels apart from the competition ones also adds to this repetitive nature too. I will say as well that if you want to go for true 100% completion in the game, it will take you an extremely long time. There's 10 characters to begin with, and to unlock every video, you need to get all of the gold medals as every character, as well as complete it again as the secret character, Officer Dick, to unlock the developer Bales video. As for a 100% completion reward, there appears to be a bit of misinformation out there as to whether you unlock anything or not. Some sources say that you unlock a hidden character called Private Carrier, but other sources say that you can only unlock her through a cheat code, so the details on this are a little bit sketchy. Personally, I kinda hope you do unlock something for doing this, because it would be so disheartening to go through all of that for nothing to happen. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend going for total 100% completion. Getting 100% as a single character though, definitely go for that because that's how you unlock Officer Dick, get the Bales video, and get your first Pro Skater video too. A really small nitpicky thing that is a little bit annoying is that you can't look at a list of your current objectives without completely reloading the level. You'd think you would be able to just press start and see them that way, but no, you can't. As I've said though, the objectives are all the same in each level anyway, so you can easily keep track of which ones you have and haven't done. What we have here though is a really solid basis for a sequel. Just make a few improvements, fine-tune a couple of things, and we could be in for not only one of the greatest sports games ever made, not even only one of the greatest multiplayer games ever made, but potentially one of the greatest games ever made, period. With this being the first game in the series I've reviewed, it's currently in the #1 spot on my Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series ranking. It has a fair amount of customization with being able to choose a character, swap decks, trucks and wheels. There's a good sense of progression with unlocking new decks and new character levels and live action videos. The levels themselves are extremely well designed, and there's constantly stuff to be tricking on and inventive ways to come up with lines for combos. The controls are a little bit janky in terms of the physics, however the way that they're mapped to the controller feels incredible and offers a ton of ways to experiment. The graphics are nice, and I appreciate the small details like the graffiti on the walls to stop areas looking barren, and the multiplayer is a fantastic addition, and this alone could be played for hours. While it's nowhere near as polished as the later games, it's worth going back to if you're a fan of the series and want to see where it all started. And that's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. As I said at the start of the review, I'm going to be taking a look at all of the Pro Skater games in the series to celebrate the upcoming release of the remakes. But something I want to clarify is that I'm not going to be going into any of the Tony Hawk games outside of the Pro Skater series, because that's just far too many games to go into. And who do you think I am? Eyed Jak? So next time in my Pro Skater marathon, we're going to be taking a look at Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. Now, a lot of people say that this is one of the greatest games ever made, but how does it hold up today? You'll have to join me for the next video and find out. For now, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to see more stuff like this coming soon, and leave a comment down below letting me know what you think to the very first Tony Hawk game. And, until the next video, bye!